So for this little video, I'm going to show you how to get started with your very first row of smocking on row 4 of your smocked pleated piece of fabric. So there's no scientific method to how do I know how much thread to pull so I can get all the way across here. There really is no scientific method. My best rule of thumb when I'm doing a typical 45-inch wide piece of fabric pleated is to pull this little stem, I call it, on the end of my thread 3 times. That's 1, 2, 3. Well, you can see that gives me quite a long piece of thread. I'm going to do that, but I have some serious doubts about its ability to get me all the way across. But that's okay because there's ways to fix that. You notice that I pulled white. Anytime you do back smocking, you want it to be as close to the color of fabric as possible, because if any of the stitches show through on the front, you want it to blend in with the color of fabric. So I have one of my shorter needles. I have my piece of thread here, and remember I said that floss is typically woven in 6 strands. We're going to separate it into 3 and 3. So literally, that's all you do is just separate that piece of floss very slowly so you don't get it tied up in knots. I used to have Brian hold the tail end for me so that it would be really smooth. So I have 3 strands here, and then I have the 3 strands that I'm going to be working with. Now, I stick mine in my mouth. I know, very unsanitary, but I just kind of get it a tiny bit wet and smooth it out, kind of flat, to thread my needle. And if you thread a needle, your eyes are all probably a lot younger than mine, but if you thread a needle on a dark surface, you can see when it's threaded a lot better. You're not going to catch both ends. You're going to have a short end and a long end, and all you're going to do is, the best way you know how, tie a double knot in the bottom of the longest piece of thread. So I've tied a single knot. I'm going to wrap it around my finger again and twist it. And I've got a double knot to start. All right, here comes the key to getting started on your piece of pleated fabric. I'm going to turn it over. I don't need the pen because I have a blue mark. And I'm going to find this first pleat right here. I'm going to talk in some very, I think, simple terms, so that, meaning they're not technical. But it's easier for me to understand things that I already know something about. Meaning, I'm going to take a bite out of this pleat. I'm literally going to go to the right side of the pleat. You see this first pleat where my blue dot is at. I'm going to go to the right side, take a tiny little bite. If you can see that, it's barely across the top. And I'm going to pull my thread through, so that the knot is on the right side and I've come out the left side of that pleat. From this point forward, I'm going to continue to do that to the next pleat and the next pleat and the next pleat. There's only one thing that you've got to remember. I'm going to lay my thread to the top, go to the next pleat to the right, and I'm going to stay on that little green guide thread. I'm going to separate this really good so you can see. There's a green guide thread, and I want my needle to be parallel over the top of that green guide thread, and I'm going to push it through from right to left again and pull it. And all I want it to do is be snug. I don't want it to be loose. I don't want it to be tight. I just want it to be snug. Now notice that my thread's coming out from the bottom of that stitch. So I'm going to lay my thread to the bottom. I'm going to go to the next pleat. On the right, push my needle through parallel to that green thread that's underneath, that green guide thread, and come out the top again on the left. Pull my thread and make it tight. Sorry, snug, not tight. And notice that my thread naturally now is coming out the top. Let me try to do it this way because you've been looking at it sideways. So I'm looking at my next pleat here. There's my green guide thread. Just going to take a little bite out of the top. You don't go deep into the fabric. Push it through from right to left and pull it snug. Now my thread is naturally falling out at the bottom. So I want to make sure it's at the bottom. Go to the next pleat, parallel to the green thread, right to left, and pull it snug. My thread is naturally at the top. Go to the next pleat, parallel over the green pleating thread, right to left, and pull it snug. Now if you can see really close here, you're beginning to see a pattern of what I call up, down, up, down, up. Now my thread is coming out the bottom, so I'm going to stitch across the same way, right to left over that green guide thread. And of course my thread's going to get hung up here and there, and pull it snug. And literally, that's how you make a straight row. You're going to continue this all the way across 220 something pleats. Right to left, keeping your thread parallel to the guide thread. Take a little bite out the top. You have to make sure you get enough to get it on your needle. And wherever your thread naturally falls, top or bottom, make sure it stays up there. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. It has to stay in that kind of a pattern. If you ever do two threads or two stitches where your thread is on the top, you'll have to take it out and start over again. Because you have to, in a straight line, the way to make a straight line is to make one stitch up, the next stitch down, and follow the natural rhythm of your thread wherever it lands between two stitches. Meaning here, the thread naturally comes down below that stitch. The next one I make parallel to the green thread, and you have to stay on that line, my thread naturally falls to the top. So I'm going to pull it to the top. And so on and so forth. Now it's down. Now it's up. And you absolutely must stay parallel to that green guide thread. That's what keeps it straight. I'm going to go back to my little example here of my dragons, excuse me. Now you can see there's movement in here, but for the most part it's just a straight stitch across. Doesn't make any kind of pattern or design, but you can see, let me use my needle to kind of demonstrate here. You can see the same kind of pattern. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And believe you me, I have done so many of these where I find, you've got two up there or you got three down there. It makes a very distinct difference, and we'll talk about the different kind of stitches as we go through this sampler. But for this piece, the very first row that you do is simply going to be straight across from beginning to end. It doesn't take long to do it, but you do have to make sure you take a big enough bite to get some fabric under your needle, but not so much that you don't want to stick that green thread. You don't want to catch that with your needle, because that will prevent your fabric from being able to slide back and forth. So don't ever catch that green thread. If you do, simply unthread your needle, pull that stitch out, thread it up, and start again. You're just going to take a tiny bite and continue across the row with the natural rhythm of your thread. Every once in a while, take your stitch and then stop and make sure. Up, down, up, down, up, down. Yep, I'm in the right pattern. I'm headed across the right row. And that's the way you begin a row of back smocking behind what eventually will be our hearts right here in our smocking design. In the next video, I'll be showing you what to do when you get to the end, or if you have to add more thread. It's not a big deal. You just tie one off and start with the next one. But then we'll begin on the next row that will have some peaks and valleys to it. We'll be doing what we call steps. We'll step up and then we'll step back down and so on and so forth. But get used to the rhythm and flow of your thread. Get used to pulling it snug, your thread snug, not tight. And don't leave it too loose. Just pull it snug so that you can complete the row from beginning to end.